everyone, Josie here with Emotional Wisdom, and today I want to talk about common sense. Yes. So before we begin, I want you to close your eyes and tell me, feel your response. What do you feel when I say, it's common sense, or that's common sense? So, please, if you're not shy, put your comment below before we go further into this video. But why do I feel making a video out of the phrase, well, that's common sense? How that phrase, what it does to people, and what it really means, and is it even a valid phrase? Well, that's common sense or saying, right? So I personally feel that being in the self-help community, being aware when I use this expression, well, that's common sense, I feel, considering that I'm aware, that it's a damaging expression. I don't see it conducive in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I don't think there's merit to that. One may argue, but Josie, there is certain things that are indeed common sense. It's common sense, we all know, that if you drive under the influence, you could get pulled over and get a DUI. Well, it's common sense that if you cross the street without looking both directions, that you could potentially get ran over. I hear you. There are certain things that we all know to be, right? But whenever we say, well, that's common sense in regards to a action or something that we believe a person should already know, I feel like we're not being aware enough. We're not being understanding enough. We're not seeing the bigger picture. Let me give you an example what I mean about this. Let's suppose that you are at a dinner, right? And you're with your friends. All of a sudden you have that friend that chews with their mouth open, and it bugs you. So when someone asks you, why does it bug you? You then reply, well, it's common sense that you don't chew like that. It's lack of mannerism or etiquette. They're lacking manners. Yet, in their reality, the person that's chewing with their mouth open is not something that they were addressed or they were told to do differently. In fact, if you were to seek to understand why they're conditioned to eat with their mouth open, you will then learn that there's a reason for that. What do you mean, Josie? Well, yeah, we tend to say the expression, well, it's common sense that they should know this or do that or be that or behave in such way. Yet, I can argue that your common sense, your sense of reality, is valid because of the way you perceived life from beginning to today's date. So since you were little, right, in the womb, infant, and so forth, up to today's date, you are creating your sense of reality and what is or should be or should not be or be according to what you lived through your filters of experiences. So if someone else had a completely different experience when it comes to etiquette, let's just stick with that example, or manners, what is deemed to have manners on the table, they're not going to perceive your statement as common sense. No, because that's not what they lived with. So if the person that is criticizing the incident, right, what's ultimately happening to that person that's criticizing is that they had an experience with someone outside of themselves that did something that person outside of you was able to rob you, practically, from your peace of mind. So that person, through his action, held the ability to trigger you and remove you from the peace of mind that you had prior to you witnessing him chewing with his mouth opened. So, if this is you, and you tend to want to say, well, that's common sense, they should know this, they should do that, it bugs me. So, if you're that person that you're hijacked by an irritation or a frustration, I advise you to look at this differently, to look at the circumstance that's irritating you differently. Seek to understand and implement this concept to or with the person, your friend, that chews with their mouth opened. You would start realizing that it's not going to trigger you as bad, as severely as it does. Because what happens? When you allow yourself to understand a behavior or an act or an action, then you allow compassion to start leaking through your perception of something. You start understanding why they do the things that they do. Ultimately, you start realizing they were not raised in the same situation as you were, in the same household that was implemented or dictated mannerisms, etiquettism. If you allowed yourself to get courageous and have a conversation with this person and ask, hey, can I ask you a question? With all due respect, do you think you're doing anything wrong or doing anything inappropriate or anything uncomfortable by chewing with your mouth open? And of course, you want to elaborate that this is you wanting to understand instead of judging or criticizing, because we all judge, so I rather use the word criticize. If you allowed yourself to have these vulnerable conversations with these friends, you will realize that that person who chews with their mouth open actually grew up with family members chewing with their mouth open. In fact, you might even learn that both parents do it, or one parent in particular does it. And he then took on that identity of the parent, and he grew up understanding it was okay. And from there, it's a condition. It's a learned behavior. It's part of his identity. He can't help it. No one ever told him it was wrong to chew with his mouth open until maybe later in his adulthood. But yet he was so conditioned to chew with his mouth open, he just didn't change it. And what would that then do to you in terms of awareness? If you then learned that this friend does this because in his household it was okay, it was normal, reality for him. But then you learn that the reason why you always hear that, or it annoys you, or you can sense, or it just, you have innate ability to just notice when people are eating with no manners, you then start diving into yourself and come into the awareness that you grew up with a family members, with parents, with authority figures that made it a point to tell you, do not chew with your mouth open. Ask to be excused from the table. Have your hands washed before you eat. You then start realizing the reason why you notice or pay attention on how people eat. Maybe you do it subconsciously, unconsciously, yet you tend to notice, and it irks you when people act a certain way on the dining table. It's because if you were to take it back to your childhood, you were taught to be a certain way, proper, mannered. So the question is, does common sense really exist the way we toss it around? I only say this because instead of us assuming and saying it's common sense, they should know, people don't know. People grow up with completely different realities, upbringings that are completely different than yours. And it's not as easy once you grow up and interact with other folks to just change who you are. It doesn't work like that. So instead of you allowing those triggers to control you and anchor you to this emotional state of irritation and keep you there, seek to understand. Ask questions. Why wait until you can't take it anymore and you blow up with this friend and say, can you stop chewing with your mouth open? Because sometimes we think we're being kind and we're doing them a favor by not saying anything. But we're irritated, annoyed, frustrated. And let me tell you, when you don't give yourself permission to speak what you really feel with this friend, what you resist persists. You will be cornered to express how you feel in an angered way, in an angered manner. So to avoid that, seek to understand. Say, hey, I have a question and please don't get offended. Why do you choose with your mouth opened? Might sound harsh, but it's better than them learning that you get annoyed through a third person behind their back, and or wait until you can't take it anymore and you blow up. So if you're that person that tosses around, it's common sense, they should know. No, we don't. No, not all of us grew up in your household, in your actual reality, in the way you process things in your brain. Because yet, people that were raised in the same household, siblings that were raised with the same parents, same structure, yet have a completely different experience. Yes, each sibling has a completely different experience. So even then, we can't say, oh, you grew up in this household, same rules, and no, still, each and every one of us process the information completely different. So, I invite you, instead of allowing the triggers outside of you to control you, seek to understand with all the love and full acceptance. Josie.